Well, a good weekend to you. I'm meteorologist John Dawson. This is the Fox 26 YouTube tropical forecast. Want to make sure you're keeping up with everything happening out there in the Atlantic as we're moving through the weekend. But I always like to pause for a moment and kind of reflect back on what's been happening this week. And yes, for the folks here in Houston, it was quite an active time as a hurricane or tropical storm, depending on exactly where you are, did move through the Houston area and impact us quite a bit for sure. Although overall, I think most of us would agree things certainly could have been a lot worse when we talk about Nicholas and what we saw with Nicholas. So I'm going to back up way back to Saturday last weekend at around 10 a.m. This is when Nicholas was just starting to get out into the waters. We were keeping an eye on it. It was really before it's actually Nicholas, but keeping an eye on this area of low pressure over in the Caribbean, and then once it crossed the Yucatan Peninsula, for sure keeping an eye on things. Then a little bit later on, when we get into Sunday, that's when Nicholas actually became Nicholas, a tropical storm identified by the National Hurricane Center on Sunday morning. And you'll notice what I want you to really pay a close attention to as we move through the life of Nicholas is that it has never been very well balanced. It always had all of the worst of what it had to offer with the winds and especially the rain, always on the east and to the northeast side, very calm on the west and to the northwest side for the most part. And a lot of that had to do early on with some upper level winds that were really fighting it, keeping it from growing stronger, because the temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, the sea surface temperatures were very warm and very conducive to really making a very strong and powerful storm. But Nicholas just really struggled and never really got its act together. As we go through, you'll see how it kind of moves around a little bit and jogs somewhat. That's because it kind of kept regenerating somewhat. It kept reorganizing, and that area of low pressure was never really solid and easy to pick out. And when you have that, it really helps it to develop into a stronger system. And it just never really had that. But Monday night at 10 p.m., that's when the Hurricane Center did agree that it did make to hurricane strength right before making its landfall north of Matagorda Bay near Sargent. And then once it made its landfall, it moved in across the Houston area, again taking a little bit of a jog as it went, becoming a depression Tuesday evening. And then by that point, everything as far as the rainfall goes has moved well off into the east, and it did drop a fair amount of rain, pretty much what we'd expected, generally that 5 to 10 inches, but a lot of that did happen out in the Gulf of Mexico, or at least the southern portions of the viewing area. Downtown Houston didn't see those highest amounts of rain. And then on Friday morning is when the Hurricane Center issued its last advisory for Nicholas. So that moisture is still there in a very disorganized fashion. We'll look at that in just a minute, but across the Gulf of Mexico, there's still some unorganized moisture. And what was left of Nicholas, the remnants, was kind of pulling it up into some of our southeastern states. And I'm not even sure it's fair to call it remnants anymore. This is just kind of where it was and what's left of it. And again, sort of giving a good soaking to the northeast for sure. And then even some of that moisture that we're seeing here in southeast Texas on Saturday afternoon is kind of getting sort of wrapped around all of that with some other upper level lows. So it's kind of getting a little bit messy as far as where Nicholas was and where it is now, but at this point we'll just sort of say it's gone, but it's definitely some rain still happening in the general moisture that's associated with it. So the latest information from the National Hurricane Center, this is 4 p.m. Saturday information. Odette is now a post-tropical cyclone, so it lost some of the characteristics it needs to be confirmed as a tropical system. So the National Hurricane Center will stop issuing advisories now on Odette, so we're done with Odette, although we did one more forecast fan. Newfoundland might be the only landmass that's going to have to be concerned with what Odette might happen, and so our National Hurricane Center is sort of turning things over to the Canadian Hurricane Center and let them take over as far as what Odette's going to do. So we're pretty much done with Odette, at least the United States is. So now let's talk about what is happening out there, because there's certainly some active things happening, not in the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, I'll start with Odette because that is a system that's out there, but not something that we're really going to monitor because, again, it it's no longer a tropical system. Way off of the African coast, there is an area, about a 50% chance it could develop into a tropical system, but this one is a little bit more that we're going to need to pay attention to. I'm pretty comfortable that this is not going to make an impact on the U.S. For sure, not coming to Texas at the moment, but it is an area of Invest 95L is what the Hurricane Center has identified this area as, and we'll get a little bit of a closer look at what that looks like. It definitely appears that it wants to become a little bit more organized for sure, and you can see the computer modeling definitely taking a look, but what we're happy to see is when we get to the end of sort of those 5 days worth of modeling, the trends are there that it's going to take that curve. So first of all, that makes us relax here for the folks in the Gulf of Mexico. So all of the Texas coast for sure. But then even the East Coast gets a little bit more comfortable with that curve that it takes. Remember, we're starting to see some fronts move down. So as the fronts move down, that kind of helps block any sort of tropical activity. And so especially this is the time of year when we begin to see less activity happening for the Houston area. But if it were to become a named system, and it really does look like it's going to become a named system any time now, it would be Peter. That's our next name on the list. So Odette was our 15th named storm, and then by the time we get to Peter, that will be the 16th named storm that we would have here for the 2021 season. I'm glad you're checking in here on YouTube. If you want to search Meteorologist John Dawson on YouTube, you're going to find my personal YouTube page where I have all the hurricane gear test segments that I've been doing. So that's a great way to really not focus too much on the specific products, but get the ideas of them and sort of know how maybe you could improve your preparations for hurricane season. Because even though we would like to think we're past the peak, we'd like to think that we're completely done, but we're not. Historically speaking, there have been tropical systems coming to Houston after this date. They're not as common, but they definitely have happened. So we're staying prepared at this point until we get a little bit further on into the season. It'd be great if you want to follow me on the other social media platforms as well. You can always look me up. I'm at John Dawson, Fox 26.